The security camera footage was crystal clear. Margaret Whitmore, HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator, backing her pristine white Lexus straight into Jake's beat-up Honda Civic. But as she stepped out, surveying the damage, with cold calculation, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes. I'd like to report a hit-and-run accident," she said, her voice dripping with false victimization. "Some reckless driver damaged my car and fled the scene." What she didn't know was that Jake Chen, the quiet specialist she'd been terrorizing for months, had just installed a hidden dashcam system that would turn her perfect lie into the evidence that would destroy everything she'd built. Jake Chen had exactly 17 minutes before his next Zoom meeting when he heard the sickening crunch of metal against metal echoing through the quiet suburban street. He was halfway through, debugging a particularly stubborn piece of code when the sound made him freeze, fingers hovering over his keyboard. Living on Maple Grove Lane for the past 2 years had taught him to recognize the specific acoustics of automotive disaster, and this one sounded expensive. He pushed back from his home office desk and peered through the blinds. His heart sank, like a stone dropped in deep water. There, in the middle of the street, sat his 10-year-old Honda Civic, its rear bumper crumpled like an accordion, surrounded by scattered pieces of red taillight plastic that glittered in the afternoon sun, like fallen rubies. Standing beside the wreckage, hands on her hips in a pose that screamed righteous indignation, was Margaret Whitmore. Even from his second-floor window, Jake could see the fury radiating from her perfectly coiffed figure. Her platinum blonde hair was pulled back in its signature power bob, and she wore one of her trademark pastel blazers. Today's was a nauseating shade of coral that probably cost more than Jake's monthly mortgage payment. Margaret was the kind of woman who treated the Homeowners Association like her personal kingdom, and every resident like a subject who had somehow disappointed her. At 53, she had the sharp, predatory features of someone who had spent decades perfecting the art of making other people's lives miserable. Her husband Richard's pharmaceutical company money had bought them the largest house on the block, and Margaret wielded that financial superiority like a weapon. Jake watched as she circled his car like a shark sensing blood in the water, her heels clicking against the asphalt with military precision. Her own white Lexus sat a few feet away, its front bumper sporting a fresh dent and a spider web of cracks across the right headlight. The evidence was overwhelming. She had clearly backed into his parked car while pulling out of her driveway, but instead of looking contrite or embarrassed, Margaret's face wore an expression Jake had learned to fear over the past 8 months of HOA hell. It was the look she got right before she found a way to make someone else's problem into their fault. Jake grabbed his keys and headed downstairs, his mind already racing through the implications. This was the same woman who had written him up for having his trash cans visible from the street for more than 12 hours, who had fined him $200 for planting native wildflowers instead of the approved grass varieties, and who had somehow gotten the city to cite him for a supposedly illegal fence that had been there since before he bought the house. The afternoon air was thick with the promise of an approaching thunderstorm as Jake stepped outside. Dark clouds were gathering on the horizon, and the wind carried the ozone scent that always preceded Texas summer downpours. Margaret looked up as he approached, and her expression shifted with practiced efficiency from annoyed to victimized. "Oh, Jake," she said, her voice taking on the saccharine tone she used when she was about to deliver particularly devastating news. "I'm so sorry you have to see this. Someone hit your car and just drove away. Can you believe the nerve of some people?" Jake stopped walking, his brain struggling to process the sheer audacity of what he was hearing. "Someone hit my car. It's absolutely disgraceful," Margaret continued, pulling out her phone with theatrical precision. "I was just coming home from my yoga class when I noticed the damage. Your poor car was just sitting there, and whoever did this didn't even have the decency to leave a note. I've already called the police to report the hit and run." The word hit and run hit Jake like a physical blow. He looked from Margaret's damaged Lexus to his crumpled Honda, then back to her face. Her expression was a masterpiece of false sympathy, but her eyes held something else, a cold calculation that made Jake's stomach turn. "Margaret," he said slowly, his voice carefully controlled, "your car has damage too." She glanced at her Lexus with practiced surprise, as if noticing the damage for the first time. "Oh my goodness, you're right. They must have hit my car first, then ricocheted into yours. The impact was probably so hard it knocked me forward into my steering wheel. I think I might have whiplash." Jake stared at her, feeling like he was watching a masterclass in gaslighting. The physics of her story made no sense. The damaged patterns, the angles, the location of debris, all pointed to one inescapable conclusion. But Margaret was spinning her narrative with the confidence of someone who had never been successfully challenged. "I should probably see a doctor," she continued, one hand moving to massage her neck with Oscar-worthy precision. "This kind of injury can be very serious. My attorney says these cases can be quite complex, especially when there's property damage and personal injury involved." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Jake had seen Margaret destroy other neighbors with legal warfare, turning minor disputes into financial catastrophes through sheer attrition. She had an arsenal of lawyers on retainer, and the kind of money that turned the justice system into a weapon. "The police should be here any minute," Margaret added, her voice now carrying an edge of anticipation. I gave them a very detailed description of what I witnessed. It's important to be thorough in these situations, don't you think? Jake felt the walls closing in around him. In Margaret's version of events, he was about to become the victim of a phantom hit-and-run driver, while she transformed herself into an injured witness deserving of sympathy and compensation. It was a perfect crime, executed with the kind of cold precision that only someone with Margaret's particular brand of sociopathy could manage. The sound of approaching sirens cut through the heavy air, and Jake felt his chest tighten. 2 patrol cars rounded the corner, their red and blue lights painting the suburban street in alternating waves of color. The officers who emerged looked tired and overworked, exactly the kind of cops who would take Margaret's statement at face value and move on to their next call. Officers, thank goodness you're here, Margaret called out, her voice now trembling with just the right amount of distress. This has been such a traumatic afternoon. As the police approached, Jake caught sight of something that made his heart leap. Mounted discreetly on his dashboard, almost invisible behind the tinted strip at the top of his windshield, was the dash cam he had installed just 3 weeks ago. The little red recording light glowed like a beacon of hope in the gathering darkness. Margaret had no idea that every moment of her performance was being captured in high-definition detail. Every lie, every calculated gesture, every false terror was all there, waiting to be discovered. But as Jake watched her begin her tearful recounting of the hit-and-run to the sympathetic officers, he realized that revealing the truth too quickly might not be the best strategy. Margaret Whitmore had been playing this game for years, using her position and wealth to terrorize anyone who dared to cross her. She had turned the neighborhood into her personal fiefdom, ruling through fear and legal intimidation. But for the first time in her reign of terror, she had finally made a mistake. She had chosen the wrong victim. Jake stood quietly in the background, watching Margaret weave her web of lies with practiced expertise, knowing that every word was being recorded. The storm clouds overhead were growing darker, and the first drops of rain were beginning to fall. But for the first time in months, Jake Chen was smiling. The reckoning was coming, and Margaret Whitmore had no idea what was about to hit her. Officer Martinez had the weathered look of a 20-year veteran who had seen every kind of suburban drama imaginable. As he took Margaret's statement, his pen moved across the notepad with mechanical efficiency, capturing her carefully crafted narrative without a trace of skepticism. His partner, Officer Kim, was photographing the damage and measuring skid marks that didn't exist. So you were returning from yoga class when you discovered the damage? Martinez asked, his voice carrying the professional monotone of someone who had taken 1,000 similar reports. That's correct, Margaret replied, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue she had produced from her designer purse. I always take the 4 o'clock hot yoga class at Sacred Lotus Studio. You can check with them if you need to verify my whereabouts. I'm a very regular customer. Ask for Sunshine. She's the instructor. Jake watched the performance with growing amazement. Margaret wasn't just lying. She was constructing an elaborate alibi with the precision of a criminal mastermind. Every detail was calculated to deflect suspicion and establish her credibility. And you witnessed the impact. Officer Kim called out from where she was examining the debris pattern. Oh, it was terrible, Margaret said, her hand fluttering to her chest. I was just pulling into my driveway when I heard this horrible crash. By the time I looked up, I saw this dark sedan speeding away. They didn't even slow down to check if anyone was hurt. Can you describe the vehicle? Martinez asked. Margaret's eyes grew distant, as if she were struggling to recall traumatic details. It was dark blue, I think, or maybe black. It happened so fast. A sedan, definitely foreign, maybe a Toyota or Honda. You know how they all look alike these days. Jake felt his jaw clench. She was describing a vehicle that could be half the cars in the neighborhood, making it impossible to disprove while sounding specific enough to be believable. What about the license plate? Officer Kim asked. I tried to see it, but they were going too fast, Margaret said with a helpless shrug. I'm just grateful no one was seriously injured, well, except for my neck. I think the shock of witnessing such reckless behavior gave me whiplash. As if on cue, Margaret winced and rubbed her neck again. Jake realized she was building a personal injury case in real time, right in front of the police officers who would soon be writing an official report that could be used in court. Mr. Chen, Officer Martinez turned to Jake. Do you have any idea who might have done this? Any ongoing disputes with neighbors? Workplace conflicts? That sort of thing. Jake felt the weight of Margaret's stare as he considered his answer. This was his moment. He could reveal the dash cam footage right now and end her charade. But something held him back. Maybe it was the 2 years of systematic harassment he had endured, or maybe it was the cold satisfaction of watching Margaret dig herself deeper into a hole of her own making. No ongoing disputes, Jake said carefully. Though I did have some issues with the HOA recently. Nothing that would lead to vandalism, though. Margaret's expression didn't change, but Jake caught the flash of something predatory in her eyes. She was already calculating how to spin his HOA troubles into evidence of his unstable character. The HOA issues, Officer Martinez made a note. Can you elaborate? Just typical stuff, Jake replied. fence height regulations, approved plant varieties, trash can placement. Mrs. Whitmore has been very thorough in her enforcement of the rules. It's important to maintain property values, Margaret interjected smoothly. I take my responsibilities as HOA president very seriously. Some residents don't appreciate the need for standards, but we have to think about the whole community. The way she said it made Jake sound like a problem resident who couldn't follow simple rules. Officer Martinez nodded sympathetically clearly. He had dealt with enough HOA disputes to recognize the type. Well, we'll file the report, Martinez said, closing his notepad. Mr. Chen, you'll need to contact your insurance company, Mrs. Whitmore. If you're experiencing any pain or discomfort, you should see a doctor as soon as possible. I've already called my physician, Margaret said. Dr. Hendricks is squeezing me in this evening. I'm sure he'll want to document everything. For insurance purposes, as the officers packed up their equipment, the first real drops of rain began to fall. The storm that had been threatening all afternoon was finally arriving, and the wind was picking up, sending loose leaves skittering across the asphalt. Is there anything else we need to know? Officer Kim asked, giving both Jake and Margaret a final once-over. Margaret stepped forward, her voice taking on the confidential tone of someone sharing important information. Well, I hate to say this, but Jake has been under quite a bit of stress lately. The HOA citations, some issues with his work. I've noticed him acting rather erratically. Jake's blood pressure spiked. She was planting seeds of doubt about his mental state, laying groundwork for a narrative that would paint him as unstable and potentially dangerous. What kind of erratic behavior? Officer Martinez asked, his pen reappearing. Oh, just little things, Margaret said with practiced reluctance. Yelling at delivery drivers, slamming doors, staying up all hours with loud music. His property maintenance has been slipping too. I've been trying to be patient, but some of the other neighbors have expressed concerns. Each lie was crafted with surgical precision, designed to sound like the worried observations of a concerned neighbor rather than character assassination. Jake realized that Margaret wasn't just covering up her accident, she was destroying his credibility in case he tried to challenge her story. I see, Martinez said, making another note. Mr. Chen, is there anything you'd like to add? Jake looked at Margaret's face, saw the subtle smile playing at the corners of her mouth, and made his decision. No, officer. Nothing to add right now. All right then. We'll have the report filed within 24 hours. You'll both receive copies. For your insurance companies, as the police cars pulled away, their red and blue lights disappearing into the gathering dusk. Jake and Margaret were left alone on the rain-slick street. The suburban tableau looked peaceful enough. Two neighbors, dealing with the aftermath of an unfortunate accident, but the reality was far more sinister. Margaret turned to face Jake, and for a moment, her mask slipped completely. The fake sympathy and manufactured concern disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. You know, Jake, she said, her voice now carrying its familiar edge of menace, accidents like this can be very expensive. Insurance companies are notorious for trying to avoid paying claims, especially when there are complications. Complications. Well, there's my injury, of course. Soft tissue damage can be very serious, very expensive to treat. And then there's the psychological trauma of witnessing such a violent event. My therapist says I might need months of counseling to process what I've been through. Jake stared at her, finally understanding the full scope of what she was planning. This wasn't just about covering up a fender bender. Margaret was constructing an elaborate insurance fraud scheme that would cost thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars. Of course, if the hit-and-run driver was never found, Margaret continued, the costs would fall to your insurance company under your uninsured motorist coverage. That could really impact your rates, couldn't it? Might even make it hard to get coverage in the future. The threat was crystal clear. Margaret was going to bleed his insurance company dry with fraudulent medical claims, and there was nothing he could do about it, or at least, that's what she thought. I should probably call my insurance company, Jake said. Oh, absolutely. The sooner the better. These things can get very complicated if you wait too long. Margaret's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. I've already spoken to my attorney, of course. Richard insists we pursue every avenue of compensation. He says people who flee accident scenes need to be held accountable, even if they're never caught. As Margaret walked back toward her house, her heels clicking against the wet pavement with triumphant precision, Jake pulled out his phone. But instead of calling his insurance company, he opened the dashcam app that connected to his recording system. The footage was perfect, crystal clear, properly time-stamped, showing Margaret backing out of her driveway while talking on her phone, completely oblivious to his parked car until the moment of impact. The app had automatically saved the incident as a critical event, preserving not just the collision but also the 20 minutes that is followed, including Margaret's entire performance for the police officers. But Jake didn't stop there. Over the past 3 weeks, since installing the system, he had been documenting every interaction with Margaret and the HOA. The threatening letters, the harassment campaigns, the intimidation tactics, it was all there, building a comprehensive picture of Margaret's pattern of abuse. As Jake stood in the growing storm, rain beginning to soak through his shirt, he felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Margaret Whitmore had built her power on the foundation of being untouchable, of having enough money and influence to make problems disappear. But she had finally overplayed her hand. She had committed multiple felonies in front of a high-def camera, created a paper trail with law enforcement, and involved insurance companies that took fraud very seriously. More importantly, she had done it all. Jake spent the next morning doing something he hadn't done in months. He smiled while drinking his coffee. Outside his kitchen window, he could see Margaret's house across the street, its pristine white columns and manicured lawn, a testament to her obsession with controlling every detail of her environment. What she couldn't control, however, was the digital evidence that was about to unravel her entire world. His phone had been buzzing since dawn. Mrs. Patterson's text had been just the beginning. Word of the accident had spread through the neighborhoods. Informal communication networked with the speed of wildfire, and Jake was discovering that Margaret had far more enemies than he had realized. The first call came from Tom Rodriguez, who lived 2 houses down. "Jake, man, I heard about your car. That's rough. Listen, I don't know if this helps, but I've got one of those Ring doorbells, and it might have caught something. Want me to check the footage?" The second call was from Dr. Elizabeth Warren, not the politician, but a retired chemistry professor who lived at the end of the block. "Mr. Chen, I witnessed the entire incident from my garden. That woman backed straight into your car while she was on her phone, then had the audacity to lie to those poor officers. I've been documenting her behavior for 2 years now. Would you be interested in seeing my notes?" By 10 a.m., Jake had received calls from 7 neighbors, all offering evidence, testimony, or moral support. Margaret's reign of terror had created a network of silent victims who had been waiting for someone to stand up to her. Now that someone finally had the ammunition to fight back, they were eager to join the battle. But Jake's most important call came at 10:47 a.m., from a number he didn't recognize. "Is this Jake Chen?" The voice was crisp, professional, with a slight New York accent. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm an investigative journalist with Channel 7 News. I understand you've had some trouble with your HOA president." Jake nearly dropped his phone. "How did you? I've been working on a story about HOA abuse for the past 6 months," Sarah continued. "Margaret Whitmore's name keeps coming up in my research. Yesterday's police report was automatically flagged by our news monitoring system, and when I saw her name attached to a hit-and-run incident, well, let's just say it fits a pattern." "What kind of pattern?" "The kind that wins Emmy Awards," Sarah said with grim satisfaction. "Mr. Chen, would you be willing to meet with me? I think you might be very interested in what I've discovered about your HOA president." 2 hours later, Jake found himself sitting across from Sarah Mitchell in a quiet corner booth at Rosie's Diner, the kind of old-school restaurant where the coffee was strong and the waitresses had been there since the Carter administration. Sarah was younger than he had expected, probably in her early 30s, with sharp green eyes and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she was very good at her job. "Before we begin," Sarah said, sliding a tablet across the table, "I want you to watch something." The screen showed a professional-looking woman in her 40s, sitting in what appeared to be a law office. The timestamp indicated the video had been recorded 3 weeks ago. "My name is Jennifer Walsh," the woman on the screen said, "and I was the previous HOA president of Maple Grove Lane. I'm recording this statement because I believe the residents of that community deserve to know the truth about Margaret Whitmore." Jake leaned forward, his attention completely captured. "Margaret didn't just defeat me in the election," Jennifer continued. "She destroyed my life. It started with small things, violations for having my Christmas lights up one day past the deadline, fines for weeds that didn't exist, accusations of violating architectural guidelines that she had written specifically to target my house." The woman's voice began to shake with barely controlled emotion. "When I tried to fight back, she escalated. Suddenly I was receiving anonymous complaints about everything: my dog barking, loud parties I wasn't having, illegal modifications to my property that had been approved by the previous board. She had her lawyer send me threatening letters, file nuisance lawsuits, even tried to get the city to condemn my house for supposed code violations." Jake felt his stomach tighten as he recognized the pattern of harassment he had been experiencing. The final straw came when she accused me of embezzling HOA funds. She had fabricated an entire paper trail suggesting I had stolen nearly $30,000. Even though the investigation cleared me completely, the stress and legal fees bankrupted me. I lost my house, my marriage fell apart, and I had to move 3 states away to start over. The video ended, leaving Jake staring at the blank screen in stunned silence. "That's just one of them," Sarah said quietly. "I've documented 17 similar cases over the past 5 years. Margaret has a system. She identifies threats to her authority, then systematically destroys them using legal warfare, social manipulation, and outright fraud. 17 people, 17 that I can prove. The actual number is probably much higher." Sarah pulled out a thick folder and spread its contents across the table. "Property records showing suspicious ownership transfers, insurance claims that follow suspicious patterns, police reports documenting harassment campaigns, medical records showing stress-related hospitalizations." Jake flipped through the documents, each page revealing another layer of Margaret's criminal enterprise. She wasn't just a difficult neighbor or an overzealous HOA president. She was a sophisticated sociopath who had turned property management into a weapon of mass destruction. The thing about people like Margaret, Sarah continued, is that they get careless when they think they're untouchable. Yesterday's incident with your car, that's not her first hit and run. I've found 3 other similar cases, all with the same pattern. She causes an accident, then claims to be the victim or witness. Why hasn't anyone stopped her? Money and fear, Sarah said simply. She has enough resources to outlast most people in court, and she's very good at making the cost of fighting her higher than the cost of just giving up. But here's the thing, she's finally made a mistake. Sarah leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with predatory anticipation. She doesn't know that I've been building a case against her for months. She doesn't know that the FBI's insurance fraud unit has been watching her for suspicious claim patterns. And she definitely doesn't know that you have video evidence of her committing multiple felonies. Jake felt his pulse quicken. You know about the dash cam? I know about everything, Jake. The question is, are you ready to take her down? Before Jake could answer, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Margaret's number. Answer it, Sarah whispered, pulling out a small recording device. Put it on speaker. Jake accepted the call, his hands slightly trembling. Hello, Margaret. Jake, darling, I hope you're feeling better today. Margaret's voice dripped with false sympathy. I know yesterday was traumatic for both of us. I've been thinking about our conversation, and I have a proposition for you. What kind of proposition? Well, I've been talking to my attorney, and he thinks this whole situation could drag on for months, maybe years. Insurance companies, investigations, depositions, could be very expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. Jake caught Sarah's eye. She was recording everything, her expression focused and deadly serious. But, Margaret continued, I've always believed in being neighborly. What if we could find a way to resolve this privately, between friends? I'm listening. I'm prepared to offer you a very generous settlement, $25,000, cash, to cover your damages, and any inconvenience. All you'd need to do is sign a simple agreement stating that you were satisfied with the resolution and wouldn't pursue any further action. Jake's grip tightened on the phone. $25,000 to keep quiet about her crimes. It was a substantial bribe, and more importantly, it was being offered on a recorded line. That's very generous, Jake said carefully. I'm glad you think so. There would be just one small condition you'd need to agree not to discuss the incident with anyone else. You know how rumors can spread in a neighborhood, and I'd hate for there to be any misunderstandings. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Take the money and stay quiet, or face the full force of Margaret's legal and financial arsenal. I'll need some time to think about it, Jake said. Of course. But don't take too long. My attorney says these kinds of offers have expiration dates. Shall we say 48 hours? After Margaret hung up, Sarah looked at Jake with something approaching awe. Did she just offer you a $25,000 bribe on a recorded phone call? She asked. I think she did. Jake, Sarah said, her voice filled with savage satisfaction. Margaret Whitmore just made the biggest mistake of her life. She doesn't realize it yet, but she's about to become the star of a very public news investigation that's going to destroy everything she's built. Sarah began packing up her materials, her movements quick and efficient. I need you to do exactly what I tell you over the next 48 hours. Don't contact your insurance company yet. Don't respond to Margaret's offer. Don't do anything that might tip her off. Can you do that? Jake nodded, feeling like he was being swept up in forces beyond his control. Good, because tomorrow morning, Margaret Whitmore is going to wake up to discover that her perfect little world is about to come crashing down.